When Sarah placed the blister pack of pills into the brown paper bag, she didn't know she was changing a life. The bag made a soft rustle as her hand folded it shut, hiding inside those heart pills that cost twice the monthly salary of an average person. On her thin face, her eyes held a strange light, not pity, not fear, just a quiet calm, as if she had already accepted what she was doing, regardless of the consequences. Across the counter, Noah stood there in the shape of an old, weary man, his pockets frayed, his trembling hands clutching a wallet with only a few crumpled bills left inside. The cold morning air slipped through the crack in the door, brushing against the strands of grey hair stuck to the sweat on his forehead. He wasn't a stranger. He was the CEO of one of the largest healthcare systems in the state, but today he was just a man who couldn't afford his medication. "Take it," Sarah said, her voice as soft as the wind but slicing through the thick silence of that old pharmacy. "We'll figure it out later." Their eyes met. In that moment, Noah saw the firmness in her deep brown eyes. It brought back a distant memory of his frail mother, who died when he was just a boy because there wasn't enough money for medicine. He had stood there too, with trembling hands, listening to the doctor say, "No money, no medicine." That memory had driven Noah for the next 30 years to build a massive system on the unshakable belief that rules protected people from chaos. Procedures never failed, numbers didn't lie. But in that moment, when he took the medicine from Sarah's hands, his eyes wavered, his heart tightened, a tiny crack tearing through the wall of belief he had built all those years. Because Sarah didn't ask if he had enough money, didn't ask for insurance or ID. She simply placed the medicine in his hand as if the right to breathe needed no permission. He walked out of the pharmacy, cold wind brushing his face, his hand clutching the paper bag as he listened to his heartbeat, louder than usual. On that street lined with grey buildings, where people hurried past each other without looking back, Noah realized something. He had spent his whole life believing in rules, but perhaps he had forgotten about people. A blister pack, a sentence, a look. They had begun to change an entire system, and that was when the story began. That morning, Noah woke up earlier than usual. He sat quietly on the edge of the bed in the tiny room he was renting near the outskirts of town, where the smell of dampness and old wood mingled with every breath. In his hand was the same paper bag from yesterday, inside the expensive heart pills, lying there silently like an unspoken testimony. The early morning light came through the crack in the window, painting pale yellow streaks on the floor. He looked at them, remembering Sarah's eyes, fearless, without judgment, only gentle determination when she said, "We'll figure it out later." Noah once thought he understood exactly how the world worked. He built Helios Care on iron principles. Everything must have a process. Every transaction must have paperwork. Every act of aid must come with conditions to avoid mistakes. He had believed that if the system was tight enough, people would be protected. But yesterday, he saw a young woman break all those rules with a simple, gentle action, with a soft-spoken sentence. And last night, Noah couldn't sleep. In the dark, He could hear his own heartbeat, and in the spaces between he heard his mother's voice from long ago. "Don't be afraid. I'll be okay." But she wasn't okay, because there wasn't enough money for medicine. He closed his eyes, his hand tightening, crushing the paper bag in his palm, and Noah understood that to find the truth, he had to go back. He put on an old jacket, worn jeans, and a pair of faded sneakers he couldn't even remember buying. He didn't bring a driver, no company phone, no CEO badge, only a prescription for diabetes medication this time, also manufactured by his company, and $200 in cash in his wallet. The street was the same, broken bricks on the sidewalk, old lampposts creaking in the wind, the smell of bread from the corner shop mixing with bus exhaust. Sarah's pharmacy still sat wedged between a laundromat and a small convenience store, the sign above it rattling every time a truck passed by. Noah stood outside the pharmacy, taking a deep breath. He saw his reflection in the glass door, an old man, tired, his eyes questioning himself. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The cool air and the familiar scent of antiseptic wrapped around him. Sarah stood behind the counter, tying her hair back with an old elastic band. She looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes before they softened. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but warm. "Feeling any better today?" That simple question was so normal it made Noah choke up. She didn't know who he was, didn't know he held the power over the survival of this pharmacy, over her job. She simply saw him as a human being, a patient, a person in need of help. "I need this medicine." Noah handed over the prescription, his voice rough. "I don't have insurance." Sarah took the paper, her eyes scanning it. Her hands trembled slightly, but she quickly steadied herself. She typed a few keys on the old computer, the screen lighting up with the number $520. Noah opened his wallet, pulling out the crumpled bills, counting them slowly. Only $60. He looked up, his eyes red not from illness, but from a nameless shame. In that moment, he was no longer a CEO. He was just a man who couldn't afford to live. Sarah looked at him, her eyes unchanged, still gentle, still calm. And for the second time, she placed the medicine in the paper bag, pushing it across the counter. "Take it. You need it, don't you?" Noah stood there, his hands trembling as he took the bag. His lips moved, but no sound came out. In the quiet pharmacy, he could hear his own breathing, the rapid beating of his heart, and the gentle firmness in the young woman's voice. When he stepped out of the pharmacy, the sun had risen higher, lighting up the tiny dust particles floating in the air. He turned back to look through the glass, seeing Sarah bent over, writing something in an old, blue notebook. He knew, in that moment, an investigation had begun, but more than that, a question was ringing clearly in his heart. Noah sat on a stone bench across from the pharmacy, holding a paper coffee cup that had long gone cold, the white foam clinging to the rim as he took a small, bitter sip. In front of him, the foggy window of the pharmacy reflected the pale morning sunlight, occasionally trembling when the door opened, letting out a soft jingle. He had been sitting there for 2 hours, just watching. Sarah was behind the counter, hair tied neatly, wearing an old but clean white coat, her hands moving constantly between the shelves and the computer. But there were no cheerful greetings, no laughter or background music, only the beep of the barcode scanner, the click of the keyboard, the soft clink of plastic bottles tapping against each other as she reorganized the shelves. An old man came in, hunched over, his hands shaking as he carried a plastic bag full of coins and small bills. He opened his mouth, his voice hoarse. I need diabetes medication." Sarah didn't show any annoyance, didn't rush. She patiently took the bag of money, counted each coin, smiled softly as she handed back a few coins, then placed a box of medication on the counter. "Remember to take it on time. Okay, it's cold today. Make sure you dress warmly." The old man didn't respond, just nodded slightly, his eyes red as his hands trembled while taking the box before slowly walking out, the door jingling once more. Noah tightened his grip on the coffee cup, a discomfort rising in his throat. He took a deep breath, watching the old man's slow steps, the small box of medicine tucked carefully into the pocket of his torn coat. A young mother came in, carrying a crying baby, the child's face flushed, breathing raspy. She handed over a crumpled prescription to Sarah, her eyes flustered. I don't have enough money yet. My baby. He's had a fever for days." Sarah quickly read the prescription, didn't ask any further questions, turned around, grabbed a bottle of fever-reducing syrup and a small packet of medicine. She placed them on the counter, bending down to look at the crying baby, her eyes softening. "Little one, you need to get well soon." "Okay." She turned to the mother, her voice soft but firm. "Take these. Come back when you can." The mother's hands shook as she accepted the medicine, tears falling down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you," before hurrying out with her child, leaving behind the sound of a baby's cry mixed with the soft chime of the door. Noah watched, his breathing heavy, his fingers tapping unconsciously on the paper cup. A voice echoed in his mind. "This isn't procedure. This is chaos." But in Sarah's eyes, Noah didn't see chaos. He saw an odd calmness, as if she had done this dozens of times, as if she was used to reaching out when others were in despair. Sarah didn't log these transactions into the system. Noah noticed that. She didn't scan barcodes, didn't enter data, didn't print receipts. Instead, she opened the drawer under the counter, pulling out a worn blue notebook with faded flowers on the cover. She opened it and wrote a few lines with a blue pen. "Mr. B. Diabetes. Pay Friday. Ms. H. Fever syrup for child. Pay later." When she finished writing, she set the pen down, looked out through the glass window to the street, her eyes distant for a few seconds before she bowed her head to continue her work. In that moment, Noah saw loneliness slip into her strong posture. An elderly man in an old coat with a torn beanie walked in as noon approached. He handed over a prescription, eyes fixed on the floor. "My wife just got out of the hospital. The doctor said she needs this medicine." Sarah checked the medication, read the price, then looked up, meeting the fear in his eyes. I haven't received my benefits yet." She didn't ask any further, only nodded, placed the medicine into a paper bag, and pushed it across the counter. Her voice soft. "Go home and take care of your wife. Come back when you can." The old man stood still, hands trembling, eyes brimming with tears, as he whispered, "Thank you. Thank you." He turned and walked out, his steps uneven, the knit hat on his head swaying with each step. Noah closed his eyes, his hand gripping the paper cup so hard it crumpled. In that moment, he realized something. Sarah wasn't breaking the system. She was healing the cracks in a system that had forgotten about people. There was no doubt left. He knew he had to investigate, to confront, to decide, not about whether Sarah had broken the rules. That afternoon, the sun was at its peak, casting harsh light down on the cracked sidewalks. Sarah's pharmacy remained quiet, with only the soft hum of the old air conditioner and the gentle clink of medicine bottles knocking against each other as she rearranged the shelves. Noah stepped in, his hat pulled low, clutching the crumpled paper bag. He pretended to browse a few bottles of vitamins, walking around, but in truth, his eyes followed every movement Sarah made behind the counter. Sarah opened the drawer again, pulling out the same old blue notebook. Its cover had faded, the corners were curled and frayed, the edges of the pages lifted from moisture. She held her pen, writing down the name of the person who had just left, followed by a few words, blood pressure meds, paying gradually. Noah saw her hand tremble slightly as she set the pen down, but her eyes remained oddly calm. He stared at that notebook, wondering how many stories it held, how many promises, how many lives were saved simply because of the words, "Come back when you can." In that moment, Noah made his decision. As Sarah stepped outside to help a customer, Noah quietly moved to the counter, his hands shaking as he opened the drawer and pulled out the notebook. He stood tucked into the corner, flipping through the pages with trembling fingers. Inside, the handwriting was round, neat, but there were smudges where the ink had blurred, probably from someone's tears falling onto the page. Mr. M. Diabetes meds, due Friday. Ms. L. Cough syrup for child, no charge. Mr. H. Blood pressure meds. He cried when he was able to pay. Each line was a story, a life, a moment between life and death. And Noah realized this wasn't a debt book, but a ledger of trust, a map of kindness, existing in the quiet strength of a young woman. He closed the notebook, placed it back exactly where it belonged, and wiped the sweat from his forehead. His breathing was heavy, his eyes stung. In that moment, Noah felt as if the notebook itself was judging him, exposing the limits of the system he had spent his entire life proudly building. The bell above the door jingled suddenly as it swung open. An elderly woman stepped in, clutching her chest, breathing rapidly. Her face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead, her eyes unfocused. She collapsed right at the entrance. Sarah turned back, a flicker of fear crossing her face for a split second before calm returned. She rushed from behind the counter, dropping to her knees beside the woman. "Ma'am, Can you hear me? Look at me. Breathe slowly. Sarah reached into her pocket, pulling out a small bottle of nitroglycerin, spraying it under the woman's tongue, her other hand gripping the woman's tightly, her voice trembling but firm. You need to slow your breathing. You're going to be okay. The woman gasped, her rapid breathing slowly evening out, the bluish tint on her lips turning pink again. She squeezed Sarah's hand, her cloudy eyes filling with tears. Sarah helped her sit up against the wall, ran back to the counter to grab a bottle of water and a few pills, returned, and softly said, "Take a sip. Then these pills. You're going to be fine." Noah stood nearby, his hand clenching tightly, his eyes glistening. This was no longer a CEO observing an employee. This was no longer an investigation. This was a moment between life and death. And he understood, no procedure is ever faster than a heartbeat that is about to stop. At that exact moment, the door swung open again. Grant, the branch manager, walked in, clipboard in hand, his eyes cold and sharp. He looked at Sarah kneeling beside the elderly woman, his gaze filled with annoyance. Again. "Sarah, do you even know what you're doing?" Sarah looked up, her eyes tired but resolute. She couldn't wait. Grant's voice was harsh. "You don't have the authority to decide. We have procedures, laws. We have..." Sarah didn't answer, only turned back to help the elderly woman to her feet, gently patting her shoulder. "You're going to be okay." Noah watched the entire scene, his heart pounding. He saw Grant's face flush with anger, while Sarah, her head bowed, showed no fear in her eyes. In that moment, Noah realized Sarah wasn't fighting the system to break it. She was fighting the indifference that was hiding within every procedure. She had placed her heart on the line between life and death for others, ready to take the responsibility, ready to pay the price, just to ensure someone wasn't left behind. And Noah knew his investigation had found its answer. But it was not the answer the system had expected. That night, Noah sat alone in his small rented room, the dim yellow light casting shadows over his age-spotted hands clutching the worn paper bag. The sounds of traffic outside came and went, the hurried noises fading and returning, like the rhythm of his own heart, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. On the table, his laptop screen glowed with a stream of emails from the internal compliance department. Urgent, missing medication report from Northbridge branch. Video evidence of Sarah Lane violating procedure. Request for emergency meeting. Detailed report required for disciplinary action. Noah clicked through each email, watching the videos he himself had recorded, the images of Sarah kneeling to save the elderly woman, placing medicine in the hands of a poor father with no money, quietly writing their names into her notebook. Sarah's voice in the video, trembling but firm, "Breathe. You're going to be okay." Grant's angry voice in the video, "You don't have the authority to decide." Noah turned off the video, burying his head in his hands, his heart pounding so hard his chest ached. All his life, he had believed that procedures protected people. When his mother died because they couldn't afford her medication, he had told himself, if there was a system strong enough, strict enough, no one would ever have to die like my mother did. And he had built Helios Care into a pharmaceutical empire where every pill was accounted for, every order tracked, every transaction bound by regulations. But now, Noah realized that his system was standing between the sick and their survival, just as it once stood between his mother and the heart medication she needed. Sarah had broken that system, but she hadn't done it out of selfishness. She had done it for those who couldn't wait for permission. The next morning, he walked into the pharmacy, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, his eyes heavy. The air inside the shop was thick, unusually silent. Sarah stood behind the counter, arranging blister packs, dark circles under her eyes. Grant stood nearby, clipboard in hand, his gaze cold, scanning every detail. Grant turned to Noah, still believing he was just an elderly customer. "We'll have this matter resolved soon." Noah nodded slightly, saying nothing. He stood quietly near the shelves, listening to everything. A young employee named Ben, barely in his 20s, stepped closer to Noah, his voice soft. "Sir, did you know? Sarah once saved my mum." Noah turned, surprised. Ben looked toward Sarah, his eyes warm. "It was a Sunday. My mum's blood pressure crashed, and we were out of medication. No one sells medicine on Sundays. I was panicking. I called Sarah, not expecting anything." Ben swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "She came. She brought the medication, sat with my mum, counted her pulse until she stabilized. She didn't take a penny." Noah listened to every word, each one slicing through the defenses he had built all his life. Inside the small back office, Grant was on a video call with the internal compliance team. "She's repeatedly violated procedures, dispensing medication without payment, without system entry, without receipts. This is a serious breach." A voice from the screen replied, "We cannot tolerate violations, regardless of the reason. Procedures exist to ensure fairness." Sarah sat silently, her face calm, but her eyes deeply sad. She spoke softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I know I broke the rules, but if I were in those situations again, I would do the same." The room fell silent. Grant gripped his pen tightly, and the person on the video call frowned. Noah stood outside the door, hearing it all. He turned away, looking out the window at the street, where a father was guiding a small child across, the child coughing hard, tears streaking down his face. He saw the image of his mother from years ago, saw again the people who stood at pharmacy counters, their hands trembling as they counted out coins. And he knew he could no longer stay silent. That morning, the air inside the pharmacy was taut like a drawn string. Every employee was present, standing quietly around the small back office. The pale yellow fluorescent light reflected off tired, worried faces. Sarah stood by the wall, her hands clasped, her eyes on the old tiled floor. Grant sat at the front, holding a thick folder clearly labeled "Procedure Violations," dispensing medication without receipts, repeated incidents. A laptop on the table displayed the cold face of the compliance officer, the voice firm, "Today, we will resolve this matter once and for all." Outside the small window, the morning sunlight pierced through floating dust. illuminating Sarah's face. She still didn't look up. Suddenly, Noah stepped forward, resting his hand lightly on the table, his eyes sweeping across the room. He removed his old hat, shrugged off his faded coat, each movement slow but deliberate. A strange, complete silence settled over the room. Grant looked at Noah, frowning. "What are you doing here?" "This is an internal meeting." Noah didn't answer immediately. He lifted his hand, removing his thick glasses, revealing his tired, deeply set eyes. He took a deep breath, his voice low but clear. "I'm not a customer." He paused, letting everyone in the room feel the weight of the silence before he continued. "I'm Noah Carter, CEO of Helios Care." The room froze. Grant's mouth dropped open, and he took a step back, the folder slipping from his hand, papers scattering across the tiled floor. Sarah slowly lifted her head, eyes wide, her pupils trembling, her lips moving, but no sound coming out. A young pharmacist standing nearby whispered softly, "Oh my God." Noah took a deep breath, his eyes scanning every face in the room, from Sarah, who looked shaken, to Grant, who was in shock, to the young employees holding their breath. He placed both hands on the table. "Leaning forward, I came here thinking I would catch recklessness, undisciplined actions that were tearing down the system I built." He paused, his voice catching, his eyes glistening with tears. "But what I found was courage." He pulled out his phone and played a recording. The room filled with Sarah's voice in the moment she was saving the elderly woman who had collapsed at the pharmacy door. "Ma'am, take a deep breath. You're going to be okay." The sound of medicine bottles clinking, water being poured, and Sarah's whisper in the middle of heavy breathing, "Please, don't die in front of me." The recording ended, and the silence was so deep that everyone could hear a pin drop. Noah gently set the phone down on the table, his voice resonating, deep, clear, unwavering. "Sarah, that day, you saved a life." And I realized that the procedures I once trusted had forgotten the most important thing: saving lives doesn't wait. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, her hands clenched tightly, her face trembling for a moment, but her eyes shone brighter than ever. Grant swallowed hard, his voice sharp. Do you have any idea how many rules she broke? If we let this slide, others will follow, and the system will collapse." Noah turned to Grant, his eyes calm. "Grant, you're wrong. The system won't collapse because of people who break procedures to save lives. It collapses because we forget why it exists in the first place." He turned back to face Sarah, his voice softening. "Warm and steady, Sarah. I know you were afraid, but you did it anyway. You did the right thing." Tears began to fall from Sarah's eyes, rolling down her cheeks, dropping onto the tiled floor, but she no longer looked down. Her eyes were bright, resolute. Noah turned to face all the employees. "We cannot forget. We make medicine to save lives, not to turn patients into numbers." He lifted the crumpled paper bag Sarah once handed him. "She reminded me why I started building Helios Care." He lowered his hand, his voice firm. That is why, today, I am announcing Sarah will not be fired. The room filled with sounds of relief. Some covered their mouths, choked up, everyone's eyes turning towards Sarah. On the contrary, Sarah will be appointed as the head of the Patient Support Fund project across our entire system. Sarah broke down in tears, her hands covering her mouth. Her head bowed as her shoulders shook with relief, with vindication, with the feeling that for the first time she didn't have to fear her own kindness. Noah stepped forward, placing his hand on her shoulder, his voice deep, decisive. This system needs people who have the courage to do what is right. And we will start again. From today. In that moment. Helios Care was no longer just a company. It became a place of new beginnings. Starting from a single small act, a pill placed into the hand of someone who needed it most. And Noah understood that sometimes. To save the system, you have to let your heart speak first. 1 week after that fateful meeting, Helios Care began to change. The walls that were once covered in procedures, clauses, and penalty regulations now had new papers posted, boldly printed with Patient Support Fund, no one left behind. Sarah stood in the small meeting room, still wearing her old white coat. But now on her chest was a new badge, Sarah Lane, Patient Support Project Manager. She looked at the badge, her hand gently brushing over her name, her breath trembling softly, the corners of her mouth lifting into a gentle smile, though her eyes still shimmered with tears. On her first morning in her new role, Sarah sat in the meeting room with branch employees. A thick folder in front of her containing lists of patients who had once owed for medicine, people who had been turned away because they didn't have enough money. She opened her laptop, her voice soft but steady. I know these numbers have once been seen as burdens, but each name here is a life, a family. The room was silent, everyone's eyes on Sarah, seeing her for the first time with respect, not as an employee who broke procedures, but as someone who was willing to take responsibility for her kindness. Outside the pharmacy counter, a young mother carrying her little boy walked in, the child coughing lightly, his cheeks flushed red. Sarah stepped forward, kneeling down to meet the boy's eyes. "How are you feeling today, little man?" The boy pressed his lips together, holding up the brand-new inhaler Sarah had given his mother the day before, his eyes bright. I can breathe now." Sarah smiled, ruffling his hair, her eyes glistening. The mother squeezed Sarah's hand, her voice shaking. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Sarah held her hand, gently shaking her head. "Just keep him healthy. That's enough." In the clinics affiliated with Helios Care, envelopes marked Patient Support Fund were handed to patients who couldn't afford their medications. No longer turned away over $10, $20. An elderly man holding a prescription, his hands shaking, was met with a pharmacist's warm smile as they quietly handed him his medicine. "Sir, you don't need to pay today. The fund will cover you." The old man froze, tears falling onto his wrinkled hands, his lips quivering. "Thank you, thank you." Noah, from his office on the top floor, stood by the window, looking down at the streets where these people were walking, carrying their medicine, their second chances, their returning breaths. In his hand was Sarah's old blue notebook, which she had given him to use as a reference for the project. He flipped through each page, the small, rounded handwriting. The notes: Mr. M, blood pressure, paid in full, smiled. Ms. L, cough syrup, child recovered. Little T, asthma, follow-up next month. Each line was like a thread pulling Noah back, reminding him why he had started in the first place, so that no one would have to die because they couldn't afford a pill. That evening, Noah went to the pharmacy, no longer a man hiding behind a worn hat, but as himself. Sarah was tidying up the counter, looking up with a gentle smile. "Hello." Noah stepped forward, placing the notebook on the counter, his voice warm and deep. "Thank you for reminding me, Sarah." Sarah smiled softly, tears welling in her eyes. "I just did what I believed was right." Noah looked around the pharmacy, the yellow lights illuminating the shelves of medicine, the ticking of the clock, the soft chime of the bell as the door opened and customers were greeted with a smile. He realized a system isn't strong because of its rigidity, but because of the hearts of those who are willing to put life above procedures. That day, as he stepped out of the pharmacy, Noah looked up at the quiet blue sky, the breeze gently blowing, leaves softly rustling. He knew that a seed had been planted from a single pill placed into the hand of someone who needed it most, from the words, "Come back when you can," from a young woman who wasn't afraid to break the rules for a human life, and he, himself, would protect that seed and help it grow within the system he once built. In just 3 months. What began in a small pharmacy spread across the entire Helios care system, at branches once run by cold spreadsheets and strict procedures. Patient support funds now appeared next to the registers. Pharmacists who once feared making mistakes were now trained to recognize emergencies and help immediately. And leading the training was none other than Sarah Lane. Sarah stood before a team of pharmacists at a new branch, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes bright yet steady. "I know you're worried, afraid of breaking procedures, afraid of being penalized. I used to be afraid too." She paused, looking at each tense face, young people who had endured exhausting shifts, who had watched patients walk away because they couldn't afford medicine. But if we don't dare to ask questions, if we don't dare to listen to the breath of a patient before the beep of a barcode scanner, then we are not healers. A young employee raised their hand, their voice soft. "But what if we get penalized?" Sarah smiled gently, her eyes resolute. "If someone needs to take responsibility, I will be the first." Across branches in the city, stories began to appear. An elderly woman, trembling, approached the pharmacy counter, preparing to pull out a bag of coins. When the pharmacist smiled, "Ma'am, you don't need to pay today. The fund will cover you." The old woman froze, tears falling onto her wrinkled hands, her lips quivering. Thank you, dear." A young father, holding his little daughter, returned to the pharmacy with an old receipt, his voice stammering, I brought the money. Last time she gave my daughter medicine when she couldn't breathe. The pharmacist took the money, placed it into the fund box, and smiled. As long as she's well again, that's what matters. The young father stood there, his eyes glistening, bowing deeply, as if in gratitude to life itself. The story began to spread. Local media came to interview Sarah, asking her why she dared to do what she did. In front of the camera, she simply smiled. "I don't think I did anything extraordinary. I just thought, if a child is wheezing in front of me, I can't turn my back." The article, titled "Young Pharmacist Changes the Whole System," spread across social media, receiving millions of shares, thousands of thank yous from people who had received life-saving medication when they needed it most. In his office, high above, Noah read every article, watched every interview clip of Sarah, his eyes glowing with warm light. He stepped out onto the balcony, the wind brushing through his silver hair, his hand gripping the railing, a strange peace swelling in his heart. The system he built had finally begun to learn how to listen to people. That weekend, Noah decided to personally visit a branch in a poor suburban area. He didn't bring an entourage, no luxury car, just a thin jacket and an old baseball cap. When he stepped into the pharmacy, the bell jingled and a young pharmacist was bending down, handing a box of medicine to an elderly man. The man held the pharmacist's hand. Tears in his eyes. "I thought I would never get to take my medicine again." The pharmacist smiled softly. "Your health is what matters most." Noah stood there quietly, watching, his hand trembling slightly, but the corner of his lips lifted into a gentle smile, a smile he hadn't worn in a long time. That evening, Noah returned to his office, turned on his desk lamp, and took out a new file titled "Plan to Expand Patient Support Fund Nationwide." He signed the bottom right of the first page, his signature firm, his eyes shining with renewed faith. The system did not collapse when people were put before procedure. On the contrary, it became stronger, more humane, and truer to its purpose. And it all started with a young woman, a pill, a notebook, and a promise that no one would be left behind. Sarah stepped off the bus just as the sun was rising, pale light brushing against her hair, the morning breeze carrying the scent of damp grass. That day, she no longer stood at the pharmacy counter alone. Beside her were 3 young pharmacists she had trained under the Humane Pharmacist program initiated by Helios Care. In the morning, a boy about 7 years old came in with his mother. The boy shivered in a torn sweater, his face gaunt, eyes red from coughing all night. The mother handed over a prescription, her voice hoarse. I don't have enough to buy the inhaler," the doctor said. "My son needs it right away." Sarah bent down to meet the boy's eyes, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. "What's your name?" My name is Kyle. Kyle. Today I'm going to give you an inhaler. You're going to be able to breathe. Okay, promise me." The boy looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Sarah handed the inhaler to his mother, asking nothing more, only saying softly, "Let him breathe." At noon, An elderly man limped in. He carried the scent of the wind, of earth clinging to his old coat, holding out a trembling prescription. I have no one left to ask. Heart medicine. I don't have enough money. A young pharmacist on Sarah's team stepped forward, looked at him, smiled, then turned to get the medicine, placing it in a paper bag. Don't worry, you still have us. The old man looked at the young woman, tears streaming down his deeply lined face, his hands trembling as he took the bag, his voice breaking. Thank you, thank you. Sarah watched from a distance, nodding softly, her heart warming as she saw her young colleagues learning to put people above numbers. In the afternoon, a woman came in holding a baby girl who was crying out from a high fever, her face flushed red. The mother's voice was choked. She's been burning up all night. I don't know what to do. Sarah gently took the baby from the mother's arms, placing her hand on the child's forehead, feeling the heat radiating, then turned to the mother. Give me a moment. She took a bottle of fever-reducing medicine, a bottle of water, returned, mixed the medicine, and fed the baby small sips. After a few minutes, the baby stopped crying, breathing evenly, her eyes fluttering with exhaustion. The mother burst into tears, holding Sarah's hand. Thank you, thank you. You saved my daughter. Sarah smiled softly, wiping the mother's tears. All that matters is that she's okay. At that same moment, in his office, high above, Noah was receiving thank you letters from everywhere. A letter from an old man, written shakily on yellowed paper. I thought I wouldn't survive this winter. But that day, a young woman placed medicine in my hand and said, You need to live. No one has ever said that to me. An email from a single mother. Thanks to the free medication from the support fund, my son survived a severe asthma attack. I don't know how to thank you, but I promise to raise him to be kind, just as Ms. Sarah was kind to us. A message from a hospital nurse. Sarah helped our patient get medicine exactly when it was needed. She saved a life. Noah read every word, his eyes burning. He placed the letters neatly on his desk, looking through the window down to the streets where people continued living because of the medicine, because of the kindness of a young woman. Sarah didn't appear on TV often, didn't accept more interviews, didn't post photos, didn't talk about herself on social media. But in branches across the system, young pharmacists whispered to one another. But instead of being turned away, they were met with smiles, with gentle words. Take it. We'll figure it out later. Sarah left the cemetery, walking past rows of trees, her heart light. As she turned away, the morning sunlight touched the small pill resting on the gravestone, sparkling like a promise fulfilled. The bell jingled softly on a warm morning as Sarah finished arranging boxes of medicine recently delivered through the emergency support program. A middle-aged man walked in, his face gaunt, carrying a boy of about 8, the child's body trembling, wheezing, his eyes dull, his small hand clutching his father's shirt. The father placed the boy on a chair, his voice urgent, choked. Please, please help my son. I don't have enough money. The air in the pharmacy froze, customers in line falling silent, the boy's labored breathing filling the room. Noah looked at Sarah, his eyes glowing with pride, the corners of his mouth trembling, his voice warm and deep. "No, Sarah, you didn't just save Ethan, you saved this entire system." Outside, people hurried along sidewalks, cars honked, life was noisy and chaotic. But in that small pharmacy, a boy was breathing normally again. A father held his son with tearful eyes. A young woman's hands were dusty with medicine, but her eyes were bright. And an old man who once believed procedures were everything stood there, realizing that life could never be delayed by any procedure. That day, in hundreds of Helios Care branches nationwide, medicine was placed directly into patients' hands without barriers. Children breathed, mothers lived, elders continued their final days with hope. Seeds of humanity were quietly but powerfully sown everywhere, thanks to a young woman who once promised at her mother's grave, "I will not let anyone die just because they don't have money." Noah stepped out of the pharmacy, looking up at the clear blue sky, sunlight warming his face, the breeze moving through his silver hair. Light, but enough to remind him he was alive, still breathing, still able to do the right thing. And he knew everything was only just beginning. Noah sat alone in his office late at night, the yellow lamplight falling over piles of files on his desk. He opened a new letter from a mountain hospital, the handwriting neat and careful, thanks to the Patient Support Fund. Our patient received medication in time, saving a young mother from heart failure. Noah set the letter down, his hand trembling, his eyes hot. He turned to look at the old photo of his mother on the desk, her gentle smile, her eyes soft despite the lines of age. His hand rested on the photo, whispering, "Mom, I finally understand." Sarah stepped out of the pharmacy at the end of the day, tired but at peace, watching people pass by on the street with a quiet smile. Today, she had given medicine to a young mother, helping her child through a severe asthma attack. Today, she had placed heart medicine into the hands of an old man who never dreamed he could have it. Today, she had patted a young boy's head and watched him breathe easier. And today, Sarah knew she had kept her promise to her mother. Never let anyone die just because they don't have money. Across the country, pills once trapped in red tape were now given out faster, more simply, with a sentence that carried weight. "Take it. We'll figure it out later." That day, when Noah and Sarah met again at a meeting with branch managers, Noah looked at Sarah and nodded softly, his eyes filled with trust. Sarah smiled back, asking for no thanks, no recognition. She understood the most important thing was not who received credit, but how many lives would continue because of these changes. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a new generation of pharmacists, a new generation of leaders, a generation of people unafraid to put their hearts into their work, unafraid to stand up for life, even in the face of rigid procedures and risk. And you, listening to this story, can be part of that change too. You may not be a CEO, a pharmacist, or a doctor, but you can be the person who asks someone, "Are you okay?" You can be the one who gives up your seat for an elderly person gasping for breath on the bus. You can be the one who places your hand on the shoulder of someone in despair and says, "You are not alone." Because change does not begin with grand decisions, but with small actions, every day, patiently, quietly, but steadfastly. Noah once believed the strength of a system lay in strict control, but he learned true strength lies in compassion, in heart, in the courage to stand up for what is right. Sarah was once afraid to break procedure to save someone, but now she knew she was not wrong for choosing life, and those who dare to do what is right will never have to regret it. Are you ready to be part of this change? If this story touched your heart, share it so more people understand. Sometimes, the right thing isn't perfect compliance, but saving a life the moment it needs saving. If you want to, leave a comment below this video, sharing a time when you or someone you know did the right thing even when it was hard. We want to hear, because these stories will be the small flames that keep this world warm. And if you believe in stories that bring faith, hope, and kindness, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. For a day when no one is left behind, for a day when medicine reaches those who need it most, for a day when people like you, like me, like Sarah, will have the courage to do what is right.